Don Wright left a legacy at 1011 News as chief photographer and news director. He was there to capture significant events across Nebraska and push the boundaries of news gathering photography. Don was always behind the scenes and in the background, quiet, unassuming, dependable, patient. Hardly the usual qualities found in a TV news director. Don started life in Meadow Grove, Nebraska, served in the U.S. Army from 1943 to 1946, went to college on the GI Bill, receiving a degree from Denver University in photography, political science, and journalism. After working at the Lincoln Star newspaper for 3 years, he was first in line when Channel 10 opened their doors on February 18, 1953. Hired as a reporter and photographer, Don used his large format camera to shoot black and white stills that aired on KOLN newscasts. He pushed the station through the silent film era and into the days of tape. He moved through the ranks and retired as news director after 34 years at KOLN.
Don was very quiet, very modest behind the scenes. And that's probably what made him such a good photographer.
Almost any reporter, any photographer can capture images. That's not hard. Don captured stories.
You just knew working with Don that he was the real deal. He knew exactly what he was doing with a story, top to bottom. His framing was impeccable.
He caught little angles that other people missed. He caught little subtle nuances in people's faces that really told the story better than anybody.
Don taught me a lot about f-stops and depth of field and lighting. And in those days, we were using 16 millimeter film, sometimes in the beginning with spring wound cameras.
And he'd always be in the dark room where he was always developing all this stuff. And remember, in the old days, they had a great deal of work in order to get some pictures on the air.
And he saw the evolution that went from film photography to EFP photography.
We went out and had to cover this strike, and we were on a railroad trestle in Lincoln and talking with some strikers and the scabs who crossed the strike lines. They were a little threatening to us, but he was calm and he managed to get the story even when this guy was really just angry with us for being there. And I marveled at his composure and his focus, and I learned a lot from him that night.
He was just completely unflappable, even when everything kind of fell apart.
He did his job covering the day-to-day news, telling stories of what was going on locally and across the state. National Guard F-80 plane crash at Lincoln Airport, 1955. The fire at the state prison in 1955. And the Platte River flood in 1962. Many important political figures of national and worldly interest passed through. Don was there to capture these moments. Dwight D. Eisenhower, presidential announcement, 1952. Vice President Richard Nixon on a tractor near Columbus, 1956. Eleanor Roosevelt arriving in Lincoln to speak at the university, 1957. Harry S. Truman for a Democratic political convention, 1958. Presidential candidate John F. Kennedy in the rotunda of the state capitol, 1960. Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson at a campaign stop in Lincoln, 1960. Ronald and Nancy Reagan at KOLN Studios, 1961. And Nebraska State Senator Terry Carpenter in the unicameral 1970s.
In 1957, I was a freshman at the University of Minnesota, and one day I sat down to read the newspaper, and there were headlines in the Duluth News-Tribune, one of the biggest mass murders in the history of the United States.
Don Wright was also on the scene when the Starkweather murders paralyzed Nebraska.
I looked at the picture. It just took my breath away. How could somebody who was my age and had red hair like I had red hair do something like that? I didn't realize at the time that that picture was shot by Don Wright, KOLN KGIN television in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Don's pictures of Starkweather went viral. They were published in Newsweek, Home, Life, and Good Housekeeping magazines, in addition to the AP and UPI wire services.
Don Wright was never wrong, in terms of the way he shot pictures.
We called him Darn Wright. And that was pretty racy back in the 70s, But,
So he was just a jack of all trades in the newsroom, and anything that went wrong, Don fixed.
He always was in charge of the news fleet. News people are known to be a little bit messy, so we always teased him about get the chicken bones out of the cars and get them cleaned up.
Being in TV had its perks for Don. He had his fair share of fun times, doing interesting things and mingling with the stars.
We spent a week in 1974 in the Ozarks with the Beverly Hillbillies on location. And everybody was very casual, but there was Don behind the scenes with his crisp white shirt and his necktie, very professionally recording everything that happened for that full week.
Don reached a new high when flying with the Blue Angels.
We covered the visit of President Ford, President Gerald Ford, when he was at Lincoln. He and I teamed up together on that. Also an interview with Marlon Brando at the airport was pretty memorable.
In 2016, Don received the Broadcast Pioneer Award from the College of Journalism at UNL.
I appreciate the induction of Don into the Hall of Fame because he's an actual hands-on working guy.
He did not even realize how important he was to all of us.
He was a fantastic human being to work with and just class act.
He set a good example for everybody that came after him at 10, 11, and he's a great guy.
Congratulations on this well-deserved Lifetime Achievement Award from the Nebraska Broadcasters, and you've been a good friend and a terrific role model.
I can't think of anyone more deserving of such a high honor.
That's why it's so important that he's being recognized now in the Hall of Fame. It's long overdue, and I'm so proud of him, and I'm so thankful.
I think that Don Wright more than deserves to be in the Nebraska Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
Here's looking at you, kid.
Don is donating many of his pictures to the Nebraska State Historical Society, thus preserving Nebraska history for generations to come. Congratulations to Don Wright on his induction into the Nebraska Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame, Class of 2017.